Hello, my name is Curry Bird, recovered alcoholic and recovering human. I'm the host and founder of the Recovery My Way podcast, a podcast about how I recovered from alcoholism by realizing one simple truth, that I could not drink. As a result of this moment of clarity, I have not found it necessary to drink alcohol to change the way I feel since July the 20th of 1997. I am also the co-founder of the Freedom Through Choice Foundation, a nonprofit that focuses on helping humanity reclaim their personal power and to realize the power of their own choices and how choices affect their life every day. I have also come to know that I am not special, unique, or different just because I drank irresponsibly. I'm no different than anyone that I have met or will ever meet because of this. I am on my personal journey just as you are, the human journey. I would like to share my journey with you and hope that something I've experienced on my road to recovery just might help another human being who still struggles with any addiction. I owe my life to my addiction because for me it was a fast track to self-discovery. I would like to welcome you to the Recovery My Way podcast. Hey everybody, this will be our fourth episode. Deb and I are going to talk a little bit about the steps. I want to sort of talk about what they meant to me and how they affected my life and still do today. And Deb is going to, Deb started out in Alcoholics Anonymous and she has her own interpretation. So the biggest part that we want to get across is that everybody interprets things differently. You'll look at something, and you take what you want and leave the rest. It's not a one size fits all thing. So we're going to run through these things and sort of talk about them. And we hope you guys enjoy the dialogue. Anyway, we're going to get going. Deb, I guess we'll start off with the first step. I mean, that's the place. I'm going to quote the steps. I want to read them out just exactly as they are. Step one, we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. For me, the powerless thing has always been a deal with me, but there's no doubt at that moment in time, drinking alcohol, I was, in my current mindset, I was powerless over alcohol, at that point in my life until the day I decided not to be. The biggest gist of it is step one is just for me, I came to a place to where I was humble enough to know that I needed to change my life. Something had to change. It had to start with me. It was about nobody else. So step one for me is a step at being humble, beginning to be humble for the first time in my life and honest with myself too.
It is a great awareness when I think a person can actually realize that, they're powerless at this point. I don't know that I understood this step, and I remember going through the motions of being powerless, again, because I had a hard time connecting to recovery in any way, with AA and the 12 steps and the big book and all the things I had, and I read them all. What I remember, though, in the beginning was that I admitted that my life was unmanageable, and I knew alcohol was the reason. But I don't know that I felt fully in the admitting powerlessness over it. And I think I understood that later, and then just really released myself from that, too, as I went on in recovery. But I do remember this was really tied to my participation in AA and with people at meetings and stories I hear, that I may not have necessarily felt powerless right away, but it was still beneficial. They have a saying in AA, fake it till you make it. Now I understand what that means. I don't know that I did before. Going through some of the motions of it just were helpful, is all I'm saying, in the beginning, especially for me, in creating a pattern and a routine. I just wanted things to not be so painful every day.
Yeah. For me, I think it was when I honestly decided, and I didn't know this at the time, but when I honestly decided to truly love myself, everything. Up to that point, I hadn't done a very good job at loving myself because my life was really a mess. things were not going well. It finally brought me to a place. I was at that place. So that's what step one sort of meant to me. You know, like I said, the powerless thing, I don't know about all that, but it doesn't matter. I had to believe I was powerless to know that I was not. I know that when I drank, I didn't stop drinking until I either passed out or I drank. I like to drink. And I drank to camouflage things that I was feeling. You know, a lot of things that I had blocked out from that happened years and years ago. It was when I truly started to become humble and started to love myself, which was a good place for me to be. Step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step one for me was when I was right before I checked into the treatment center. That night, things had really come down to it. They had come crashing down all at once, and the reality stopped. You know, it stepped in, and I got down on my knees that night, and I was crying like a baby. And I said, God, I need some help with this. I can't. I don't want to do it anymore. And it's it. I can't do it. It's period. I'm done. And I went to sleep. I cried myself to sleep, literally. And I woke up the next day, and it was a new day. I'm not sure what happened when I slept, but I can tell you this: I've never been the same since that. You know, for step two, for me, it helped me to know that there was actually something there that cared. It helped me to believe, you know, that there was some possibility, there was some hope that things could get better, based, of course, on my choices. That's where I sort of want to go with some of it, because it is your choice. If you stop drinking, you have made a choice to stop. I think we complicate it by thinking it's an addiction, or it's a this, or it's a that. But you, believe it or not, whether you think so or not, you made a choice to stop drinking. You don't stop drinking because somebody else wants you to do it. And there's probably people that, you know, my first round of not drinking was because someone said, you've got to stop. A lot of folks know that's just going to end up to being a resentment down the line. So for me, it helped me to know that there was something there. You know, a lot of people have an issue with the whole God thing, or, you know, higher power thing. I mean, I don't see it as anything that is separate. I look at it as more of a co-creation of a dear friend that happens to be a little more balanced than I am.
I actually really like that. I struggle with this step, and I don't think I ever believed a power greater than myself could restore me. It didn't resonate with me in the way I feel I look at the literal meaning of the words. But I like what you said about it being part of yourself. That makes sense to me, and it did make sense to me. And I think I actually came to realize this at a point when someone had helped me look at, which people may have heard of, inner child reflections or inner child work. And this is where I started to see the power I had in myself to restore, to heal things, to, you know, get stronger, feel balanced, and those kinds of things, which I think is partially what the step is about. But it wasn't, it just happened later on in my journey. The thing about the steps is interesting is I think I don't know, you would know this. Are they meant to be in order? Because I think they sound like they should be, but I don't know if I experience them in order. So it'll be interesting to go through the rest of these and see.
I've never done anything in order. So
I guess you wouldn't.
No, I mean, you know, I probably, once I figured out that I couldn't drink, I just jumped over to step 12 and I was probably done with it. That was the big hurdle, right? I think, to me, I mean, it's sort of, it's symbolic of order. they really gave me a roadmap or a guide to get on with my business and start trying to be a better human being. Step two, it validated that there was a creator that loved me more than I loved myself at that time. Which was a big thing to me. And like you said, it helped me to believe in myself. It started that the seed was planted, not unlike any other seed that's planted in life. Sometimes it grows and then some wait there for 15 years before they pop out of the ground. But nonetheless, the seed was there, and it was, I was off to the races. I really had, I was done. I was done with drinking. There was no more drinking for me. There was no doubt in my mind at that point. Step three, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him or her. I think that God is always there to help us through anything that we come through. But turning my will over to something else is sort of what I did with alcohol. I was allowing the will of alcohol to run my business, based off the chemicals. I don't think it's God's job to run mine. That's my job. I do believe that there's an assistance there. When I do ask for this help, thinking that it's God's job to fix me and to run my life, I think that's a little bit of a cop out. I ask for help with anything. I ask for help from a friend of mine. It's still up to me to be willing to do the work that was needed. So I had to do the work needed to stay sober. God wasn't going to do that for me. I knew that God was there if I needed him, but it's not. That's where it sort of sticks with me, Deb. Is it's not God's job to run Curry's life.
I totally agree with you. One of the things in my own journey that was really powerful, I guess there were two things. One was that I had some help from others identifying first what my will was in living and being on the planet and the purpose of it, what I wanted for myself. That's what I think of when it says my will. It's more in sobriety than just my will about staying sober or not staying sober, picking up a drink or not picking up a drink. It's a way of thinking, I think, beyond that, how to live a life. And I needed some help with really, what is my will? I think of that like, what do I want? How do I want it to be? And that was hard for me, so that it was beyond just thinking about the drink or not the drink. The other thing is turning over my will is not what helped me be successful. What was successful for me is identifying it and then learning how to nurture that, turning it over to myself more fully, to be able to be there for myself and work to make those connections for myself and be self-leading, learning how to take risks and sort of moving through the motions to make those things a reality. So it didn't really, this one doesn't really connect with me either. There certainly can be a higher power or source or something to ask for help, whether, like you said, people or, your spiritual energy, whatever that is for you. But the whole idea of turning things over for me was really just to turn it over with me. Like I needed to step up and take my power and nurture my power to move myself forward.
Yeah. So step 3 is just a continuation of practicing humility and continue to ask for help when I need it. But it is not a crutch. Accountability starts and ends with me, period. I believe that. It's for me, this is a fine line between, not taking any responsibility for my own actions, which would continue to enable me to use God as an excuse to be accountable for myself. So I don't know. That's it still boils down to humility, but it also, like you're saying, you're starting to come into your power too, right? And I believe we have power. We all have that power. Step 4: made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Well, for me, this is where you start to get honest with yourself. You go back and you look at all the things that you've done up until that time, mostly drunkenness or some kind of a chemical induced drama. But I also knew that I could ask for help too, right? I knew that part. So I went back and I looked at all these different things, and I had a lot of things that I'd done to people. Some of these things, they were not that pleasant, but it was really about me just sort of coming clean and going back and look at these things, Deb, and remembering people that I had wronged and things that I had done, and putting it on paper. I think putting it on paper was the big thing, because I got it out, from out of me, onto something else to where it didn't have power over me anymore. It was on a piece of paper. I had looked at it, and there was a lot of things there. And some of these things, I didn't catch all these things on the first go around. As I continued my sobriety, a lot of things came back into memory, like a lot of things that happened in early childhood. But it's just taking a look at your stuff, I think, is a good tool for anybody to do any day, and I still do it today. It's a daily basis now. It's more of an upkeep or a maintenance thing. Did you have to write down a list or anything, Deb? Did you remember going through this process at all?
I think, well, like you said too, this is an ongoing approach to living now. This is something I do on a regular basis. But I think at the time, this came through for me, not in a list. I didn't make a list, but when I was in counseling, we looked at, I did go back and look at things I had done, people I had wronged, harms I caused, those kinds of things. And I love what you're saying about a list, in the sense that it then becomes outside of your just living inside your being, and you can see it. It's now put out in front of your face, and I like that. And I feel the same thing happened to me when I would share this in a counseling session, or I was part of a women's group of people in recovery. It wasn't AA, it was a different group, because it becomes public outside of just my own thinking, and that's very powerful. But I do remember the most important part of this wasn't, there was a place for trying to, make amends or whatever that is, around working with the people that harmed you, trying to build trust again and those kinds of things. But the bigger piece of work for me was in acknowledging what I told myself and how I felt about that inventory. And that's where the healing came, where I could forgive myself, release myself, and move beyond it. It never really goes away, but it stops paralyzing movement forward in healing. There was a big moment in my early recovery where I did a lot of work around this.
You're actually owning your stuff on paper.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about it. You're writing it down. And that's one of the things that my sponsor had mentioned, is that you write it down. Then I used to journal, right? Everybody talks about journaling. I don't journal anything anymore, hardly. I probably end up walking down the hall talking to myself more than anything else. In my mind, I don't do it out loud. People think you're crazy as hell. Yeah. Step 5, admit it to God, ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. I think this is key. This is key in the continuation of humility. And, to sit down with someone that you really, you just got sober, You're going through this 1 through 5 here, probably pretty, I would imagine in 3 months, if I had to guess. But you're meeting someone and you sit down, put this list together, and you're going to leave some of it off. You're like, well, I'm not going to tell them this. I'm not telling them this, right? Which is fine, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And, some of these things, you just don't, but later you do. But just to sit down with somebody you don't really know and go over all these things, this list as you've already made, sit down with another person face to face and go over these things, it's humiliating, depending upon what your things were. And lots of mine affected other people. And I was embarrassed by some of these things. I didn't want to, the hell would I want to tell somebody else about it for? But that was a good start for me in realizing and in being able to start allowing somebody else to be a friend, to think that I was on my own with it, and to realize that these things are not life ending. They're mistakes that you made or things that you feel guilty about. I mean, it takes many different dimensions here, right? But it's a good start at putting your stuff out there on the street and telling somebody about it, because we can sit back and tell somebody about it on something like this. You've done a lot of work at that point in my mind. You are telling another human being things that you've done wrong, things that I had kept trapped inside of me for a long time. It was so freeing. It was a good thing. This step 5, that was a beautiful day for me. I really had I released a lot of pain.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, I did work with some other women doing that. It was pretty, for me, it would just, I really felt like this weight came off my shoulders, because for me, there was this whole blanket of shame. And yeah, it was pretty significant. I mean, it helped me first forgive myself, build trust, because, there's sharing that with someone else who's willing to listen and be there for you. You can expect that there's not any judgment about it, which is something that I don't know I ever had before that. It felt as though I lived a life of judgment, certainly my own self-judgment, but also from other people. And that was another level of this that was just so freeing, that people could just be there for me, let me be vulnerable, talk about all those wrongs, the things, sit in my own shame about it and feel like I was loved and supported at this.
Yeah, which I hadn't had that before. Nobody wanted to listen to me about anything. Yeah. And of course I didn't know a lot of these things either. When I'm drinking, hell, I'm camouflaged. I'm drunk every day. I'll say it again, Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps, these things saved my life. I did not have a guide on how to live. I was like a big snowball rolling down through the middle of a crowd, but I had a lot of fun. Yeah. Sometimes at other people's expense, which why the steps helped me so much. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. For me, this is sort of a multi-step process and multiple events of re-choosing and recommitting to what you're wanting to do to become a better human being. God has and will continue to help me with anything that I've got, but it is not God's job to be on standby every time Curry needs some help. I think it's a short-lived. Step 6 is just something that's just so subjective and tied into free will choice. Mm-hmm. You're gonna make a mistake. I lived this way for a long time, and lots of times a defect for me could have been guilt or shame. And I didn't know what the hell I didn't know the difference between the two. So it was a pretty basic list at that time, as far as what I knew my defects of character were. And are they defects, or are they just recovering from a childhood of, being in environments that just aren't normal for kids, right? Like you mentioned before, people tell you how you need to be. So defects are defects are pretty open ended in my mind at that point anyway in my sobriety. The main thing is that you can still ask for help. So you're still being humble. I was still humble and willing to ask for help, which I forget about that now. I sit back and I'll be going over something in my mind, and I'll say, I need some help with that. And I swear to goodness, I'll sit there, the answer will come, and it seems to come a little faster than it used to because I'm a little more willing than I used to be, especially in early recovery. I was fighting a lot of this stuff, and I still, I didn't throw it all out there all at once. A lot of people feel different about this. I'm sort of interested what you would think.
This doesn't work for me because the defects of character are things I've accept as part of my journey of self-discovery. And I don't know how, I don't know that, I don't feel that removing defects. Now, I know this is a step in the process of sobriety, but it doesn't fit in a lifelong plan for me because I've learned to embrace, in a sense, defects. And I guess it's really understanding what is meant by that. But in my own interpretation, these are the things that make me continually help me look at my own stuff and say, what is this mirroring to me, first of all? And then, what choices do I want to make? Do I want to make improvements? How do I want to do that? Is this a place I want to grow? What is this fear about? Or if I find myself avoiding, if a defect is avoiding people, being angry at someone, lashing out, I don't know. I'd like to get to the bottom of why, because I am a human. And every day is a new experience all through these years of sobriety. And I'm sure maybe I think you have said this to me, whether it's been in a recording or not. There's a certain level where you can get to be comfortable. You even said a little earlier, it's easier now to look at something in certain ways and know what it's about and move forward. There's still those moments. And this, I think, makes it interesting. So anyway, this doesn't really work for me in any way.
So, so in other words, and I sit here and look at it now, and defects. So was it really a defect? I don't know. It's almost like a harsh word because I don't know, that one seems to be a little bit more, it almost could be a little bit self-defeating. Think that you're actually defected versus, there are some things you may need to have some help with. Are they necessarily defects? Maybe they are when judged by someone else, and to another person, they're just like, hey, this person needs a little bit of guidance. They're not defected. So I don't know. I'm on the fence with that one too. And the biggest thing is that, God's got to remove it today, but tomorrow I'm going to make the same choice. And guess what? It's you're back at square one. You're starting all over again. Right.
Yeah. And that can feel it can feel like it's a failure then, that I failed somehow, which it isn't necessarily a failure at all. It's a process and a choice that you made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Step 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. That goes back to I can go with shortcomings more than I could with defects, right?
Yeah.
Defects just sound, now that I'm sitting here looking at it, it's just harsh, man. That would be, for me, it's harsh, right? But humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. I think it goes back to just to having a choice to ask for help. It's just simply that. It's asking for help. Because at that point, I didn't know a shortcoming from a damn defect, right? So these two are sort of the same thing. But I'm sitting there thinking now, I mean, this defect, I really have an issue with that today. I didn't, when I first started in recovery, but today I do. I'm not defected, by golly. I just drank a shitload of alcohol, stirred up a lot of shit. That's what I did. I don't know if I was defected or not. I know that I was affected by alcohol. So, but it goes back to the same thing, Deb. I can ask God or I can ask anybody to help me out. And if I make the same choice to do the same thing again, I'm starting over with God. Because I firmly believe it's not God's job to sit there and wait on Curry to screw up. I'm going to fix this for him. He asked me once, right? Yeah. That's the beauty of free will choice and the pain, too.
Yeah. So, and the pain. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing, really. And it's discovery. You're discovering who you are. Step 8, made a list of all the persons that we had harmed and became willing to make amends to all of them. I was ready to do that. And I had just a deep desire to do it. I was ready to do it. I wanted to make things right. I had done some things to people over the years. And I honestly went and I looked for these people. Some of these folks had passed on, unfortunately. And I made amends to them in a different way. But I went out. I wrote letters. I tried to call people, and I think that the willingness here is the biggest part, because I was willing to clean my side of the street, Deb. Step 9, made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I'll throw a little bit of humor here on this one. Some things you did would make you go to jail, right? You got to use your own judgment on this one, folks. I wouldn't. You'll have to use your own judgment here. And some other things that I guess another part of that was too. I had probably had some relationships there, and there were some things that happened that weren't positive things. And I do believe, Deb, there are some things that need to be laid to rest. And you got to come clean to that in your own way. One of the things my sponsor Ron B. Want to do a podcast about my sponsors. I made my mind up. We're going to sit down and talk about those folks, because they saved my life. But he said, here's how you do it, right? He says, you just take and you write all this stuff down. He said, if these people have done or passed away or whatever, and you address the letter to God, you put a stamp on it, and you put it in the mailbox, and forget about it. I'm like, that is the craziest. I've never heard of such a thing. He said, you're done with it. You are finished with it. That's all that you can do. If you can't get a hold of somebody, they passed away, write a letter, address it to God, put a stamp on it, and put it in the mailbox.
Yeah.
And it's just like journaling. It's like any of the other stuff, right? You're willing to do it. And if it's happened to me during my recovery, is that, these things, if you'll ask for the opportunity to heal something, it will happen one way or another, whether it's this person or it's completely related to something different, right? The healing will happen, and I think that's where God, assists me a lot with. I don't know. It's a good one for me. What about you? Did you go out and just find people and go talk to them, or how'd you do it?
No, I didn't do anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do it. My amends came from changing my behavior, trying to be trustworthy and follow through with what I said I would do. That became a very important thing, because I wasn't someone people could count on. And I also, at the time I stop drinking, I had very small children. So I took efforts to like improve myself. I took parenting classes. Like my amends came from improving, I don't know, how I performed my responsibilities. And that had a lot of value to me to really do better at the things that I felt I really gave up on because I chose to drink, just be wasted more. So that's how I don't think I ever actually went back to someone and admitted. I mean, I already knew, everybody knew I was, I had, done things that were hurtful, and I really worked harder on changing my behavior. And yeah, I think that was really how I went about it.
That makes sense, Deb.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to be accountable to yourself.
Yeah.
You don't really have to be accountable to anybody else, and you just don't have, I didn't have a high opinion of myself really, at the beginning. But you're saying just don't repeat the behavior, make a different choice, and move forward with it. You're standing in your back, and you're empowered. You're becoming empowered more, it sounds like, which is what these steps did for me every day.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to share one thing, because you did mention about the letters and, putting it in the post office. I did do some letter writing, but it was really to myself, because part of amends for me was addressing how I let myself down. And that was hard. It's hard to even talk about, but I really, really had to work on making a really healthier relationship with myself. And so I did some letter writing to myself, and would read the letters almost at sometimes daily, to reinforce that, that I wanted to make progress. I was intending to make progress around, again, being trustworthy. Those were the things for me: being trustworthy, being responsible. The letter writing really helped me as well. I didn't mail those away. I just kept them because it was important. The other piece was important, of course, for me to read them.
Don't let that cat out of the bag, right?
Yeah.
Can't put that out there.
No.
It's just, I'll tell you an example that I had at one time. I was mad at my mother when my father first passed away. My dad passed away. Shortly after that, I'd had an old dog. Her name was Butch. And unbeknownst to me, I'm, 9 years old. And I come home one day, and the dog catcher's there, and they're taking Butch. They're taking another couple of dogs that I'd had. I grew up with these dogs. So I was mad at my mother for a long time. And so it's sort of funny. So I had one of those scenarios is that I was angry at Mom. I couldn't talk to her about it. So I wrote a letter to her and addressed it to God and put it in the mailbox. The funny thing is a couple of years down the line, I finally, you're new in recovery. And I said, Mom, I've been mad at you for a long time about getting rid of my dogs. I said, that made me mad. And she said, she just started to chuckle. She says, well, I hate to tell you, but I had nothing to do with that. I said, well, who did? She said, your granddaddy had the dog catcher come get the dogs. She said, because what you didn't see is that the dogs were acting funny, and the dogs had got into one of the neighbor's chicken coops and killed about 20 chickens. So, Mom had said when Daddy died that the dogs just went crazy, because they were his dogs too, and I was mad at my mom my whole life there, and everybody else, for God's sake, and she didn't have anything to do with it. So anyway, that definitely works. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I still do that to this day. I just don't do it as much, right? I think that's this is the biggest tool that you get from working everything prior to this, right? Is that it's a way to live, Deb. That's all. It's just simple as that. You mess up something, you straighten it out right away. I met a woman on a plane. This lady was 90 years old. and her husband had just passed, and they were married for like 70 years, right? And I said, how do you stay married that long? She said, we cleaned everything up every day. We didn't go to sleep mad at each other. She said, when we got mad at each other before we went to sleep, we were good with it. We talked it out and we finished it. She said, don't let things fester. And I'll always let things fester. And this step sort of reminds me of her, because I think about that nugget she dropped with me, that day. And I think just wanting to be a better human being. I mean, that's been my biggest desire all along is, I knew I couldn't drink and I want to be a better human being. That's my process. Don't drink and try to be a better human being every day.
It's the same for me. What's great now, of course, we put in the work for that, but it's now that even in the moment, I know my response to someone or my reaction isn't, I could have done better.
Yeah.
It's great now, even in the moment, that I can stop myself and say, hey, I'm sorry what I just said. I was actually reacting to, something that happened to me before, and what you said, it just triggered me, and just take care of it in the moment. But it's not always that happens, but it gets easier. But I would say too, a lot of the time leading up to now, it could fester for, a week and become aware that I needed to go back and set it straight, whatever it was. And I mostly think about how these issues I might have or reactions were hurtful to other people, or didn't communicate what I wanted to really say or what I meant, or those kinds of things, because they usually affect my inventories when I go in, and I'm really looking at my behaviors and attitudes, right? They ultimately affect other people that are in my life. And so I feel like that's why this is so important, that they can just be something in my own decision making that just affect me, but often it's the people around me too. And that's why it's so important. And with practice, it really has gotten better. I just wanted to share that with you.
Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. I'd heard this one time before. Prayer is asking a question, and meditation is waiting for the answer, which makes sense to me, right? I want to be a better human being. Me personally, I have a relationship with God. Whatever you choose that to be for you, I don't think there's a wrong or a right way. And asking for help on how to be a better person. So, I know for sure for me that I have asked for help on things and asked for clearance and guidance on things, and I get it. That was proved to me that one night, a long time ago. So I think it's just about being a better human being.
I agree. I think for me, it's most often it's not even having a direct question to ask, but instead incorporating quiet and no distraction in a period of time on a regular basis to allow for me to listen. And I think and to make note of thoughts that come forward for me. So it's very much like meditation, but for me, it's more like regular walks in nature, where I'm not listening to podcasts, or I'm not listening to music, but I'm really just being quiet. Or, at different times I've been a runner, and so running and quiet, or gardening, something that just takes away the distractions and noise, because this is where I can sort of hear that, conscious awareness come forward and help form ideas and thinking around how things are going. Just a higher awareness of like life and in general. And that's how that works for me. It took me a long time to realize that because I did actually try to set aside time to meditate, deep breathe, and nothing ever came. I mean, it just didn't work. And that's again where this thing is, we do want to, if it's prayer and meditation, if it's quiet walks, if it's sitting a cup of tea and watching the birds, whatever it is, it's really just making sure you find that space and time on a regular basis and incorporate it in.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Deb. And it goes back to self-love, right? And one size does not fit everybody. I tell you this, going out in nature, if I make a conscious move to go outside every day, my life is better. It works better. Step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. For me, if you go through this process, whether it's a spiritual awakening or whatever, for me, I became a better person. So that, I awoke in that sense. Helping other alcoholics, I probably am a little bit guilty of not carrying through with that after I left AA back in 2002. I don't necessarily go in and make it a conscious effort to deal with other alcoholics. But the interesting thing is, Deb, is they show up. Yeah. They just come out of the blue, right? We've talked about this before. Whoever needs to be there will always be there. If you keep your mindset in a mindset of service and ask how you can be of service to another human being every day, it will happen. They might not be an alcoholic. There'll be something there. There'll be something you can learn from. So, the biggest thing for me is that, I did have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And that was just a start. That 5 years in AA was just a snippet of that time.
That's great.
Well, actually, a result of it. And I continue to try to grow that every day, Deb. I think it's just a normal progression, Deb. It's going to happen. If you work at these things, it cannot help but change your life. Like you say, you took some accountability there, which is a lot of it. For me, the steps were a graceful guide in humility and a beginning to self-love. And I've said this before, but I'll be forever grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous because it gave me a guide on how to be a better human being. For that, I will be eternally grateful. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Recovery My Way podcast, a podcast about how I have somehow managed not to drink alcohol since July the 20th of 1997, and I did it my way. So until we meet again, take care and safe travels.